Welcome to the 1600 Sessions, a podcast presented by the White House Historical Association. In each episode, White House Historical Association President Stuart McLaurin interviews luminaries, historians, and eyewitnesses to history about America's most famous residence and office, the White House. We open the doors to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue because it's not only the president's house, it's the people's house. From your family to the first family, the winter holidays are a special time of year. In this episode, we'll be exploring Christmas traditions in the White House. We'll hear why the season is both the most joyous and sometimes the most stressful one of the year in the Executive Mansion.
One of my favorite stories when you talked to First Lady Barbara Bush, she said shortly after the inaugural, Nancy Clark, the White House chief florist, came in to see her and she goes, "And what will the Christmas theme be this year?" And Mrs. Bush looked at her like, "Are you crazy? We haven't even gotten to the Easter egg roll." And she said, "Mrs. Bush, we're behind schedule because of the inauguration." Truly, before all the Christmas decorations are really packed up, they have already started planning for the next Christmas and selecting the theme and ordering the materials that will be necessary. And so it really is almost a year-long event getting ready for the White House.
Stuart sat down with three different guests: Jennifer Pickens, author of Christmas at the White House, former chief usher Gary Walters, and former executive pastry chef Roland Mesnier, to talk about what goes into decorating and celebrating the Yuletide season in the White House.
Welcome to the 1600 Sessions. I'm Stuart McLaurin, president of the White House Historical Association, and today we're back in our association offices right here on Lafayette Square, overlooking the park and the White House. Pretty soon it'll be the holidays, and they're a very magical time in Washington at the White House. Our guest today is Jennifer Pickens, a historian and expert on the social life of the White House. She's written 2 books on the subject, Pets at the White House and Christmas at the White House, which is the book we'll be focusing on today. Jennifer's book details early Christmas traditions and documents the different holiday styles in the White House for the past 50 years and the special influence First Ladies have had on decorating the White House for the holidays. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today to talk about the holiday season.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us how Americans celebrated Christmas 200 years ago.
Well, I think what makes the White House so special is it's really a reflection of America and the way the White House would celebrate traditions and things. And so in the early days of the Republic, it very much was a simple family affair. It was a religious holiday. So oftentimes it was just a simple meal and a gathering of friends and family. And it wasn't the weeks of celebration and decor we're used to today. It was just a simple evening. And that is very much how our founding fathers and our earliest presidents celebrated the holiday.
The Christmas tree was a late addition to the White House. In the 1800s, they weren't really part of the American household, let alone the White House. Could you tell us about that?
One of the first accounts of a president having a Christmas tree in the White House was President Harrison and Caroline Harrison, the First Lady. That is when the average American household would have a Christmas tree. So again, it's a great reflection of the White House is of America and the times we were living in. It wasn't all the decor and all the ribbons and bows and ornaments, but it was a tree.
There was one president who didn't have a tree, and the story was featured in the early part of your book. Who was that president, and why didn't he have a Christmas tree?
Teddy Roosevelt, the famous president with this wonderful large family that came into the White House, 5 children, a menagerie of pets, and wonderful stories about the children and them celebrating the holidays and all of their animals and fun antics. He did not want a Christmas tree because he did not want to cut down a tree. He's opposed to Americans cutting down a tree and putting them in the White House. And his children had snuck one in and had it in the closet and had it decorated for the holidays. But it's really a great story about him being an environmentalist.
So when did Teddy relent and decide that he would have a Christmas tree?
So the chief of the U.S. Forest Service came and assured him that it was okay to cut down a Christmas tree. And that is sort of something that ties in today with all the trees that are at the White House. They're always at the end of the season turned into mulch and used on the White House lawns. And the National Christmas Tree Association is for all the trees that are cut down for Christmas, they are always more are planted, and they use them later after the season as well. So he was a Grinch, but he ended up, for years after that, always having a Christmas tree in his house.
Moving on to the 20th century, Mamie Eisenhower was a first lady who loved Christmas. Could you tell us about her?
She did, and there were accounts of little Christmas trees sometimes in every nook and cranny of the White House. You would hear about it, even in the housekeepers' quarters. There were different areas of the White House where they always tended to have a little bit of Christmas cheer, and she did love the holidays and was known for it.
In the Kennedy administration, Jackie Kennedy set many precedents. Could you tell us about some of those traditions Mrs. Kennedy started and how the celebration of Christmas changed after the Kennedy administration.
Mrs. Kennedy was the first lady to have a theme for the Christmas celebration. It was the Nutcracker Suite. It was in honor of her daughter Caroline, who loved the Nutcracker. But it was really interesting when you go back and you talk to people at the time. This wasn't some idea that Mrs. Kennedy had, that she'd be the first lady to have a theme for the Christmas. It sort of just happened by happenstance, and it became a tradition afterwards by accident. The other thing that she started that is really notable is having a creche in the White House, or a nativity scene. So she wasn't the first lady to have a creche, but it was the first time that was placed prominently between the portraits of George and Martha Washington, and it was a museum quality creche. It was an antique, it was very celebrated, and that is something that is a tradition that's never been broken, is that placement of the creche in the East Room since her days.
What were Lady Bird Johnson's priorities when it came to Christmas?
When we think about Lady Bird, you really do think about her Keep America Beautiful campaign. You think about her love for nature. And one of the things that's really special to me about Christmas at the White House is oftentimes the decor is a reflection of the First Lady. So when we think about nature and flowers, that was something that Mrs. Johnson really incorporated in her decor. You'd find lots of dried fruits or berries. You'd find strings of popcorn on her Christmas trees. One of the favorite memories of the president's was going through the blue Oval Room for the first time and seeing the Christmas tree and pointing out some things. And that she also oftentimes would have gingerbread men on the tree, and a little boy had already come up and nibbled on one of the legs that he saw when he walked by. And so it was very much a reflection of her and her love of the holidays. And the other thing she did finish was the creche that had been on loan for those 3 years. The first 2 years of Mrs. Kennedy, and then the third one following his assassination was on loan. But Mrs. Johnson was able to secure a permanent creche for the White House collection. And it was a wonderful creche. It was over 300 years old. It was donated by Jane Engelhard, and it is a very unique creche. It does not have the typical camels. It has horses in it, and it's a wonderful piece, and the only reason the family was willing to part with it from Italy was because they knew it was going to the White House and it would always be on display. And it has been with every First Lady since Mrs. Johnson. And it really, the ties to the creche, a lot of people don't realize, but Jane Engelhard's daughter, Annette, was Annette Reed. After the creche was donated, she went on to marry Oscar de la Renta. And it's very fun if you think the ties from her family, because Oscar de la Renta has dressed so many of the First Ladies. I think he's probably made more dresses for every living First Lady than any other designer. And to think that her, through his wife, that goes all the way back to Mrs. Johnson with the donation of the creche is kind of a fun family tie-in.
Tell us about Patricia Nixon during the holidays, and what traditions did she bring to the White House?
I think what she's probably most known for are her candlelight tours. Mrs. Nixon loved the White House. She really wanted it to be open up to as many people as possible. And during the holidays, she really used that as an excuse to open up with these candlelight tours. She often felt like during the day, some of the locals would not come see the White House. It would be more of a destination place. You'd come from out of town. And so she wanted people to feel like after work they could come through the White House and see it. Her first year in office was the largest amount of cookies they had ever made during the holidays for all these parties she would have. One of the most lasting traditions truly from the Nixon era is the history of the gingerbread house. And Hans Roffert, the White House chef, created this wonderful A-framed house during the Nixon administration. Having this A-framed house put on the historic table, designed during the Roosevelt era in the state dining room, is an unbroken tradition lasted from Mrs. Nixon. And it was such a popular hit during the Nixon administration, it actually became required to have a Marine Guard stand by, because during the tours, when they would come through, the social aides' hands weren't quite quick enough to stop these little boys and girls coming through trying to break off a little piece to take home or try to eat.
I understand Betty Ford had her own approach to the holiday. Could you tell us about that?
She did. I think her first year, they were very sensitive to the economy at the time, and she really wanted to showcase that you didn't have to go buy lavish, expensive decor to celebrate Christmas. They actually had a pamphlet that was made you could write in, and the White House would send you one, showing you how you could make Christmas ornaments out of scraps in your own home, which was really neat. But they did celebrate America in unique ways. Her second year as First Lady, Colonial Williamsburg came and trimmed the White House for the holidays.
And the Carters also celebrated, but with simplicity.
They did. Mrs. Carter was very instrumental as the First Lady of Georgia in bringing public awareness to people with mental disabilities. And so she would use that to have special tours for those groups and have them make ornaments for the decor at the White House. Her last year as First Lady, though, was quite lavish. Gone were the typical reds and greens you would see during the holidays. It was full of dusk pink and rose, and a furniture maker came and made all sorts of dolls and doll houses to trim the holidays. So she started off very simple, but her last year in the White House was very lavish.
During the Reagan administration, was there more of a Hollywood approach or theme to Christmas?
Christmas was brought to an all-time new level with Mrs. Reagan. Mrs. Reagan loved the holidays, and really, I think her time as First Lady of California, she came in and had a plan and executed it perfectly. When you talk to the staff, Roland Mesnier, the White House pastry chef, will tell you the first time he walked through a Reagan Christmas year, he felt like he actually needed to put a coat on inside because he felt like he was walking through a winter park during the holidays. She had these wonderful Santas that would come into the White House to help unveil the decor. One year was, of course, my favorite. They had the lead character from the hit show Dallas, so you had JR. Larry Hagman came dressed up as Santa. Another year, she had Mr. T show up to the White House dressed up as Santa Claus. And probably my favorite picture of Mrs. Reagan during the holidays, she's sitting in Santa's lap. And if you look really carefully, it's President Reagan dressed up as Santa Claus. So it's a very fun time of American history during the Reagan years.
Barbara Bush started a tradition for the importance of literacy, bringing storybook ideas and characters into her decorations. Could you tell us about that?
Barbara Bush, she sort of took her number one cause, which was literacy and making all Americans literate. She decided to literally hang that on the tree. And so they had the tree in the Blue Room was celebrating literacy and books especially that you'd read with children. She knew if you could learn how to read at a young age, it would change your life forever. And so lots of the classic characters, Babar, and some of the other ones that were all Dr. Seuss household names, were creations that were made to hang on the tree, and the bottom had a literary tree skirt. It was a tree skirt made of books all the way around that was just beautiful. One of the wonderful traditions they brought to the White House was actually in the Oval Office. They were legendary for having Christmas parties in Texas, where they were from, where they would have gingerbread men hung on the tree. And you were leaving the party, you could take a gingerbread man with you. And if you were lucky enough to have a meeting with the president, oftentimes you would get to leave with a cookie off of the tree. And Chef Mesnier would say he'd always have to be the first one to the White House and the last one to leave to make sure that tree stayed full of gingerbread cookies in the Oval Office. Now, I think probably Barbara Bush's greatest legacy might be the saving of the gingerbread tradition. Hans Roffert had hired Chef Mesnier, but when he hired him, he said, "You will make all the desserts and all the pastries at the White House, but you will not make the gingerbread house." And when Chef Roffert retired, Mrs. Bush went to Chef Mesnier and said, "Can you make the gingerbread house?" And he was really hesitant because his friend who had hired him had always made this house. So they came up with the agreement that if he was to make the gingerbread house, he would make it his own unique house for Mrs. Bush. It would not be your A-framed house we had seen for the past 20 plus years. And so he made this wonderful gingerbread village, and it was complete with a replica of Mrs. Bush walking out of the White House holding a little tray full of cookies. And you sort of couldn't tell if it was Mrs. Claus or Barbara Bush walking out. And so it was a wonderful thing that she was able to continue, and it stayed still in the state dining room on that same table.
What celebrations and traditions did the Clinton administration bring to the White House?
Every year, Mrs. Clinton had a wonderful different theme during the holidays. The first year was the American craft, and different students brought in things. And she also, one of my favorite things she did was told Chef Mesnier to do what he wanted with the gingerbread house. And that became the big item that you'd read about every year is what did the gingerbread house look like? The first year, the year of the craft, it was actually a White House replica. It was sort of known as the House of Socks. And you had all these different versions of First Pet socks doing different things, even playing the saxophone, dancing around the White House. And it was wonderful because she used her pets as sort of a way to open up the door to the White House to small children and other ways to reach out to them. And so Socks always sort of seemed to make his appearance all 8 years on the gingerbread house. Sometimes they celebrated the homes they grew up in. So there was one year where the gingerbread house was a replica of President Clinton's childhood home with his pet German Shepherd even laying in the front yard. They loved the holidays. They would bring different artisans. One year Ralph Lauren helped. Different people from all over the country came and participated.
You mentioned pets as ambassadors. Could you tell us about the special ambassador for George and Laura Bush?
Probably one of the most heartfelt holidays for the Bush administration was their first one. And the theme was Home for the Holidays. And what really made that unique is they picked that theme before they knew the events of September 11th. And it ended up being a very touching tribute When you think about home for the holidays, so many people that year are missing their loved ones, are not able to go home from all the tragic events from 9/11. Mrs. Bush was very disappointed that year the White House, the Secret Service had not quite figured out how they were going to open the home back up to the public and for the tours. And so Mrs. Bush used the holidays as a way to really open up the White House to more people than ever before. They had cameras in all of the rooms doing 360 panoramic views of the White House. They had different photographers come in. She was on every morning show you could think of, showing the rooms, showing the decor. And really what ended up being their hero was their little dog Barney and the Barney Cam. It's one of the most successful web launches of all times to this date. And they put a little tiny video camera on their pet Scotty dog and had him scurrying through the White House. And you could see the Christmas decor from the dog's view. And it became so popular that every year they'd bring the Barney Cam back and they would have these more intricate plots and more detailed storylines. You'd have celebrities. Sometimes you'd have the gold medal winner from the Olympics. You'd have Prime Minister of England step in. You'd have Karl Rove make appearance. All these different White House insiders and outsiders would come make guest appearances on the Barney Cam every year. And it became so popular, they also did it sometimes at Valentine's Day and other holidays. They would try to figure out ways to use their pets more than just during the holidays.
Laura Bush was a librarian, and she brought back the literacy theme from her mother-in-law. Could you tell us about that and how she modernized the idea?
She did, and it's so many of us, when we're think about our holiday traditions, we oftentimes will be hanging ornaments of our grandmothers or our different family members, and so Mrs. Bush wanted to do the same thing. She wanted Jenna and Barbara's grandmother's ornaments to come back to the White House, and so the Bush Library at A&M sent those ornaments back that had been created several years earlier that hung on the Blue Room, and they put all of those ornaments back on the Blue Room, but then she added her own twist. I think Mrs. Bush as the librarian, really the books coming to life and the stories, she modernized it in the sense she had replicas of Harry Potter's characters made for one pier table. Then she'd also have more traditional ones like Make Way for the Ducklings. And it was wonderful to see. My favorite story was she called in Chef Mesnier and wanted this wonderful dessert table to be created from Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. And Chef Mesnier did not know who Willy Wonka and the chocolate factory was, but as, you know, a wonderful White House chef he was, he went home and he bought the book and he read the book and he brought Willy Wonka's chocolate factory to life. And it was a wonderful idea she had to really get children involved and bring that story that Barbara Bush had brought to the White House many years earlier back to life with her own twist.
Moving on to President and Mrs. Obama, how did Christmas change when they brought two young daughters into the White House?
So Mrs. Obama, my favorite traditions she started was the first thing he saw when he entered the White House through the East Colonnade. The first tree was paying tribute to the Gold Star families. And she had wonderful trees set up in that corner where you could have remembrances of some of those that had fallen. And you could also sit and write notes to the military families, and she made it more up to date. You could send emails, so you could go in and immediately send an email to a soldier overseas, which is wonderful. And when you think about the children, I often think about Mrs. Obama really started using that garden when he first walked in the White House. One year, she had snowmen throughout the Rose Garden in different areas outside, and it was fun to watch little children run up to those windows and press their faces up. You know, I think about the Obamas oftentimes, and you think about their little girls. Some of their ambassadors were Bo and Sonny, and one of the things they started doing every year was making these wonderful replicas of Bo and Sonny. I remember Button Bo. Bo made out of buttons.
Tell us about the selection of that one large tree in the Blue Room.
One of the things we forget about is before Mrs. Johnson, the Christmas trees at the White House were oftentimes family friends of the president, or a staffer might know somebody that has a tree farm. But now there's a contest that goes on, and it's through the National Christmas Tree Association, and every state has a winner, and then all the state winners enter the contest, and then there's a winning farm. And it's already happened this year, so probably in early September, the White House chief usher, and oftentimes along with Dale Haney, the White House horticulturist, will go to this tree farm and they walk the whole farm and take several hours looking for this perfect tree to go in the Blue Room. And it really does take a lot to select this tree. It has to be 18 feet tall at a minimum. It has to be wide and full so it can hold all of the ornaments to celebrate the First Lady's theme, but it can't be too wide because it has to fit through the doors of the North Portico. It requires a custom stand to be in the Blue Room. It holds 15 gallons of water. They removed the chandelier in the Blue Room to anchor the top of the tree to the ceiling. And it takes anywhere, depending on the taper of the tree, between 4,500 to 8,000 lights for this one singular tree in the Blue Room. So you think about how long and how many days it's going to take to decorate that one tree and the scaffolding and everything that's involved. And then you think about the entire state floor. Most administrations will do it in about 3 to 4 days, the actual installation.
How many people get to visit the White House in person and get to see the decorations?
Truly, hundreds of thousands come in to see it, and it's through your congressman's office, so you should call your congressman to secure that tour during the holidays, and it really is a special time.
Who is in charge of picking the theme for each holiday?
Ultimately, it's up to the First Lady. So it's 100% a reflection of hers and the themes she wants to use. So you go back to Barbara Bush and Laura Bush and you think about their love for literacy, it makes sense. But Mrs. Bush would often talk about how she would receive letters from the American public recommending what they thought should be the theme for Christmas. And her last year in the White House was a patriotic theme during the holidays, and that was one that was written into the First Lady's office. But you have the White House florist, you have sometimes outside decorators that'll be brought in and consulted, and everybody has a contributing voice. The East Wing staff all sort of gives their suggestions, but ultimately it is the First Lady's choice.
Jennifer, when did you first see the White House decorations, and did that inspire you to write your book?
Oh, absolutely. I was really lucky growing up. And so at my house, my mom had 9 Christmas trees. And so when I got to go to the White House for the holidays for the first time was in 2004. And it was this wonderful musical theme that Mrs. Bush had done. Everything was flocked in white. There was truly record numbers of flocked trees throughout the entrance hall. And it was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I really had teared up, and I started to wonder what all the other years had been and what the theme was, and I wanted to go buy a book on it to give to my friends and family for Christmas, and there wasn't one.
How did you do your research for this book, and who did you talk to?
I talked to everyone that would answer the phone. And it was over 11 presidential libraries. The help of the White House Historical Association, of course, was so important. But really, I was very lucky. Every living First Lady participated in the project and wrote a foreword to their section. And every presidential library was wonderful to work with. But we worked with all of them. And the photographs are what's so important. And we're so lucky that today, especially with the help of the White House Historical Association, they've done a really good job of documenting everything during the holidays. But some of those earlier years, it really was a challenge.
That's great. Thank you for being here today, Jennifer, and thank you for sharing your love of White House history and the holidays with all of us.
Absolutely. I enjoyed being here. Thank you.
We're talking to former Chief Usher of the White House, Gary Walters. Gary retired in 2006, and we're delighted to have him here to talk with us today.
Thank you, Stuart, for the invitation.
As Chief Usher, one of the many roles and responsibilities is preparing the house for the holidays. And we're getting close to the holiday season now, and people are beginning to think about decorating their own houses. What goes into the preparations for decorating the White House for Christmas?
Well, during my time at the White House, one of the very first things I talked to the First Ladies after they moved in on January 20th was, can we sit down and talk briefly about this coming Christmas? Of course, they'd only been in the White House at that time by a week or so, and they're saying, who is this fella asking me about Christmas, which is 11 months away? But that's about how much time it takes to make all the preparations.
There are many roles and responsibilities in the White House, and those responsibilities regarding Christmas are allocated among those in special ways. Tell us about how the kitchen prepares for Christmas and how the florist prepares for Christmas.
Once again, it's an early process. During the summer, each year before Christmas, the pastry chef starts putting together various things like fruitcakes, and then he'll freeze them, put them in the flash freezer so that he can get that job out of the way over the summer. The true preparation by the kitchens begins usually around Thanksgiving, because the first week in December is when the kickoff of the holiday season, the social season at the White House. And it's usually the responsibility of the chief florist to be the one that coordinates putting up all the decorations. Most people don't realize that the decorations for the White House usually go up on the first weekend, either after Thanksgiving or first weekend in December, and it usually is a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And all the decorations have to go up in that time frame to be ready for the events that take place for the remainder of December.
That sounds like a frenzy for the day after Thanksgiving.
It's not a short day, any one of the three, that's for sure. And it's well coordinated, planned out. Everybody has their job. They know what they have to do going in. And it depends on the extent of the decorations. And over the years, they've become more intense. Each family likes to pay tribute to the Christmas holidays and have an opportunity to have friends and family and supporters in, as well as the American public, to be able to come in and see the decorations of the White House.
There's a ceremonial occasion when that tree arrives at the North Portico. Tell us about that.
Well, the National Park Service has a horse-drawn carriage. The donor brings the tree to the White House. They offload the tree onto this horse-drawn carriage, and it's brought up to the North Portico. The First Lady comes out and receives the tree from the donor. Quite frequently, there's a children's choir or somebody to set the stage, and that usually occurs at the end of November. Then First Lady invites the family in, the donors that is, to have some hot chocolate and some eggnog for their efforts in presenting the tree to the White House. Then it's a different task, getting it in.
Have there ever been any horror stories related to the tree?
Yes, once before we had the tree came in and we literally could not get it in the doors. And the chief horticulturist had to cut the bottom branches off, bore the trunk, cut the branches like a pencil sharpener, and put them back in the holes, and then cement them in so that they would be able to stay up for the whole 4 weeks of the Christmas holiday season.
That's a great story. What are some of your other memories of themes of the holidays or decorations that you remember the most?
Well, I think that something that a lot of people remember is when Mrs. Reagan decided to have multiple trees, and at one point we had up to 27 trees in the house. And the chief floral designer at that time found a product called Real Fake Snow. It was paraffin wax that was peeled, and it literally looked like snow. The best way to put the snow up on these tall trees, it went anywhere from 6 to 18 feet, was to just throw the snow on and let it come down as nature would do. Well, when you got to the taller trees, you couldn't throw it up to the top, so we'd use bucket ladders and go up. And myself, I had the chief flower designer walk beneath me, and I dumped a bucket of this snow down on her head, and that started kind of a tradition. But that was beautiful because that tradition stayed for a number of years through the Reagan administration and into the first Bush administration, and Mrs. Bush liked it. The decorations change every year, and they usually have some thematic tone to them. The Obama administration, that was military children that got involved. Mrs. Reagan had the Just Say No group, did ornaments. Even as far back as the Eisenhower administration, Mrs. Eisenhower asked that ornaments be presented, one from each state, that the Secretary of Agriculture for each state, and they were displayed on a tree. So it's been various themes through the years.
And are the decorations saved? Or are they ever repurposed and used in later years?
Absolutely. Everything that comes into the possession of the White House remains White House property, and that can't be loaned or given away. But I did find that after a few years, when I was chief usher, we were getting such a huge quantity that we were running out of storage space. And I always was getting calls, as was my predecessor, from the presidential libraries to have some degree of the Christmas decorations from each administration so they could put a display up at the presidential library. So they came up with the idea of doing a permanent loan through the archives of those ornaments and giving them en their masse to the presidential library so that they'd have that ongoing problem taken care of. We reduced our storage, and they had a supply of Christmas ornaments that had been used at the White House.
Every 4 or 8 years, Christmas comes just before a presidential inauguration, and we experience the peaceful transition of power in our country. Are there some special memories of last Christmases that presidents and first families have had in the White House?
Some of the families who traditionally go away for Christmas spend their last Christmas night at the White House. Others go ahead with their plans of travel. But normally, after a long month of entertaining and standing on their feet, sometimes in receiving lines that go on for hours, I think it's kind of a day of quiet for most of the families, whether they're here or elsewhere. And they're understanding of what's ahead of them also. After a 4-year or an 8-year presidency, the president wants to say thank you to many of his supporters. And that period between January the 7th, the end of the first week in January, until the 20th, there's usually going away parties. Hello, goodbyes, thank you, that take place also. So there's a lot that goes into those last few days. Yes, they're on their way out. Christmas is over, but there's something new going to happen very quickly. And there's a lot of activity that goes on during that period, especially for the residence staff. Not only are they getting ready to move one family out, they're getting ready to welcome a new family into the White House.
We talked about the decorating of the White House on the weekend following Thanksgiving, and there's a lot of excitement and the new decorations are going up. When do they come down, and how long does that take?
It normally, it's usually done in under 2 days. It's usually done on the weekend. If a family had gone away, it's done before they get back. It depends on when Christmas falls and whether we've had the evening candlelight tours that have been a tradition after Christmas and before New Year's Eve. So it has something to do with the timing. But normally it's taken down in 2 days. At that point, the staff is ready for Christmas to be over. So it comes down pretty readily. And of course, the house has to be completely cleaned and put back together for the events that are coming up in the month of January.
I cannot talk about Christmas at the White House without mentioning the annual White House Christmas ornament that's been produced by the association for 37 years. And I often joke that if I'd been in that room 38 years ago when the idea was presented to Mrs. Reagan, I would have thought, well, okay, fine, do an ornament. But thankfully, they did, because it's been the proceeds of that ornament for many years that have underwritten the education work and other mission work of the association. You were around in those days when that ornament was initiated, and this year is number 37. Tell us about your views on the White House Christmas ornament and maybe some special memories along the way related.
Well, the Christmas ornament is the primary reason that the Historical Association has been able to expand the way it has. And coming up with the ornaments every year and starting with the first president and some direct relationship to the ornament to each president as we've gone through, as well as the historic markers, 200th anniversary of the White House cornerstone being laid and so forth. All of those things are commemorated. The best way I can explain it is a neighbor that lived across the street from me for 30 years. We started giving him the ornaments from the very beginning. And he and his wife just 2 years ago decided to retire and move to Texas. They said, we enjoy your friendship and hope you continue to give us the Christmas ornaments. First of all, they're a magnificent product. And the fact that they have the historic content that goes along with the presentation and gives some degree of connectivity to the presidency who's being represented it's just magnificent. And it's in the vein of the responsibility of the Historical Association to provide that historic context.
And all these years they've been manufactured for us by a veteran-owned small business in Rhode Island, which is a wonderful thing as well. Thank you, Gary, for joining us today to talk about your time as Chief Usher at the White House and this very important role and responsibility.
Thank you very much.
We're talking with someone who saw those White House holidays traditions up close for many years. Chef Roland Mesnier worked in the White House from 1979 to 2004 as executive pastry chef. He served his incredible creations for 5 presidents and first ladies and tens of thousands of their guests, from heads of state to American citizens. He's also worked with us to craft many of our books for the White House Historical Association, and one of those is on his very famous gingerbread house creations, and we'll talk more about that. It's a real honor and a privilege for me to talk with one of my favorite people in White House history, Chef Roland Mesnier. Thank you for being with us here today.
My pleasure.
So tell us about how you became the executive pastry chef at the White House.
Well, interestingly enough, the White House was always intriguing me, of course, but when they asked me to take that job, I turned it down because of the job I had at that time, which I so absolutely loved. I work in a wonderful hotel in Southern Virginia. And I was not about to come to Washington. My family was happy there, everybody was happy. So several times I turned the job down until, of course, one day they asked me, Mrs. Carter's secretary asked me if I'd ever seen the White House, why don't I come for a tour? And of course, in that tour, who should show up is Mrs. Carter. And she was wonderful, very delightful lady, very nice. With open arms, she received me, calling me by my first name. That was really very, like, almost friendship in first sight, you know.
Was it an adjustment for you to work in the White House, having worked in wonderful five-star hotels in Europe and the United States?
Yes. Even when you work in those five-star places and everything, the pressure is not the same. Because here you are at the White House, this is the top of the top. This is the number one house in the world. So I don't think in a place like this you can do food and say, oh, well, you know, you may not be certain, but say, oh, that will do for today, yeah, that'd be okay. You can't go by that unless you're 100% sure. And hoops are not allowed. No hoops when you bake or cook. You have to be 100% sure that the guests will really enjoy what you're putting out there.
And were the kitchens at the White House equipped like a hotel would be?
Not quite. When I started at the White House doing pastry, there was no pastry kitchen. I worked in the main kitchen with the chefs. And the kitchen being very small the way it was, I had a tiny little corner where I would work. And you know, when the cooks needed the kitchen hot, I needed it cold. And that created some friction sometimes. But then later on, I was lucky enough to get my own pastry kitchen.
So to prepare for the holidays, when does the work begin for you?
June of the year, you start already planning, and you start to do a lot of things that are going to be like used as decoration, made out of chocolate or things like this that you can save. And then you gradually, as the year goes by, you start doing baking. You're going to use the freezer, you need to. You're going to really, you have to plan well, because at the White House, you can never run out of food or dessert. This is is really true, against the rule and regulation. You need to have, at the end of the reception, the buffet needs to be just looking like at the beginning.
So how many guests would you prepare for during the holiday season?
Well, we counted about every day, around 2 receptions of 1,200 people every day. That was the main figure we used. So that would be like 2,500 people per day it's about 3 weeks, during the 3-week span of time in December. So that was a lot. So what I needed to have ready in my freezer before that is about 120,000 pieces of cakes and cookies. Not all finished, somewhere and baked, because we wanted everything to be like fresh, okay? So many cookies, many cakes would be just shaped, frozen, and then they will be later on taken out and then baked and decorated and finished. So it looked just like you made it yesterday, you know. The worst party we had, that was always the press party. Those people came, I think they didn't eat for a week before coming to the White House, because they would eat everything. I used to joke saying, you know, they even tempt to eat the wallpaper sometimes. Those people really wanted to have for the whole year round to be paid in that day, if you will.
Tell us about some of your magical, delicious treats that were favorites of certain presidents or first ladies.
Well, you know, the selection was huge. I tried to have dessert, cookies, whatever, from all around the world, because we had diplomats that came to the White House from all around the world. So I wanted them to come to the White House and recognize right away on the buffet some dessert or cookies or pastry from their own country. You know, if you have Greek people, oh, they have baklava. Can you imagine? The French, oh, they have Yule log. The English, oh, they have plum pudding tonight. Look at these. And on like this. So those people felt almost like a very special treatment, honoring all these foreigners from the embassy. That was really the key to do.
Without giving away any classified information, is there a president who had a particular sweet tooth?
Well, you know, when they came to the White House, they all swear that they didn't care for dessert. But that changed very quickly after they saw what we could put out, you know, and they all became great fan of my work. As a matter of fact, President Reagan, I remember, used to go to people when they were having their dessert, go to their table and start explaining what they were eating. He had made a point to find out what it was and what it was made, and he would go to table and explain the guests about this.
Tell us about the tradition of the gingerbread house during the holidays.
The gingerbread house tradition really started in Europe, came from Germany. And those years at the White House, we had the assistant chef, before I arrived at the White House, who was from Germany. So he had the idea of doing the first gingerbread house during the Nixon administration. That's when it started. And he always did the same classical German A-frame house, using a lot of German cookies all over the house and everything. But every year he put a little twist to the house by making something that was very close to the first family, like maybe their pets or something, and they got all excited because of that, which was very, very nice. Now, when he retired the middle of the George Bush Senior year, and then I took over the gingerbread house from that point, which I decided to go through many different design, and in particular making the home childhood home from the President or First Lady. That's what really touched them every time, because to see that house there where they grew up, where they were born, truly became very touching.
What were some of your other favorite gingerbread house themes?
Well, the White House was always very, very, very well received. One in particular that I love, the big gingerbread, the White House in gingerbread, which is in gingerbread book. And what I like in particular, there is a picture in that book of Socks, which was the Clinton cat. And that year we called the White House, we called it the House of Socks, because we made about 30 small socks out of marzipan and placed them all over the house, hiding in corners. But we put a picture in the book of the real socks licking the icing off the house. That's a wonderful picture. You need to see, you need to have that book. You need to have that book. It's unbelievable.
Did anybody going through those parties and receptions ever try to break off a piece of the gingerbread house?
They would have, but we were well prepared. We put cord all around the gingerbread house, and we had people watching, you know, telling people, although we did have gingerbread on the table, if they wanted to taste the gingerbread, they didn't have to do that.
And how much would these creations weigh?
Around 300, 350 pounds, because you remember you have the gingerbread and you have chocolate. Those weigh everything down. Now, the chocolate was to secure the house, to make it strong, because we don't put support in that house. When we say gingerbread house, it is fully gingerbread house. And then, but we use a little chocolate in the back of the gingerbread so people could see. That gave the house stability. You know, gingerbread is like a sponge. It will take the humidity, and if the water gets dry, it will retract very quickly, cause the house to crack. So if you don't have enough stability in a house, you're probably going to have a disaster within a week or two, and you do not want to have that during the holidays.
Would you prepare the house one place and then move it into the state dining room?
Yes, we usually build the big gingerbread house in what we call the China room at the White House. This is where all the china that was ever made for the White House is exhibited down there. So, of course, we covered all the wall, covered the floor, covered everything. Because, you know, the gingerbread is cut through with a bandsaw. So that makes dust a little bit. So we needed to really keep everything clean. But after, when we had the house, we had not too many choice to take the house out, to take it to the ground floor. We tried one year to use the president's elevator, but the house wouldn't fit in here. And that's the biggest elevator we have. Now, what we decide to do is to wheel the house outside and on the street, really, and load it on a truck and drive it around all the way into Pennsylvania Avenue and all around and come in through the front gate and unload in the front portico, put it on cart and wheel it in, because the entrance door was the big door that we could use to bring the house. It was quite stressful, because even though we have experienced people here at the White House, we have the best people to do that, because they are the ones who are trusted with fine furniture, fine china, fine this, fine that. So those guys know what they're doing, and they're doing it for years. So I had full confidence in them, but still it's nerve-wracking until the last minute when the house is put up. Now, one year I had a very bad situation, nearly got an heart attack, very close, didn't happen, thank God, but that was close. That's the year I built an enormous castle. It's in the book, by the way, an enormous castle with the tower and everything. And then we had Santa coming out of the castle with the reindeer and everything. Really a big production. This one was probably closer to 400 some pounds. And we had a Santa tower that was very tall. And in the state dining room, then that year, Mrs. Clinton said, no, because it is so big, we're not going to put it on a pier table at the end. We're going to put it right on the main table. And so those guys grabbed the whole thing, lifted up. There were 5, 6, 7 guys. And as they grab it, the middle tower start coming down. So I said, that's it. It's going to crash through the wall. And the press was so excited. They were going to have their first, mishap at the White House with the gingerbread. Oh, they were so excited. But as the tower came down, it stopped like this. It stopped. First I thought, God is with me. But God had nothing to do with it. I realized suddenly that year we put wire in the house for electricity, because we had bulbs in different rooms, different tower. Those very tiny electric wire, and those wire, thank God, I hooked them into the chocolate. So when it came down, it went as far as the leeway, and then those wire just held the tower back. Saved by the bell. One more time, but that was an exciting moment. I was very scared at this time, because if the tower had come down, it would have definitely crashed through the wall of the castle.
Well, after dozens of parties and thousands of visitors and the holidays are over, and I'm afraid the answer to this is probably pretty sad, what happens to the gingerbread house?
Go to the dumpster. Remember, I was in a room where thousands of people have gone by. One year I had a great idea, because we had at the house the little black dog from President Bush, Barney. Remember, we used to do a Barney camp at the White House every year. And I was part of it practically every year. And one year when we were going to dump the house, I went to our chief usher, Mr. Gary Walters, and I said, sir, we are about to dump the house, but I have an idea. Why don't we cut an opening and put Barney inside the house, with his head sticking out? We can use it for next year, Barney come. He said, no, that's not going to happen. End of conversation.
Tell us one or two of your most special memories of Christmas at the White House.
First of all, you have all the family from employees and people that we know. Remember, you have people from the Secret Service, from anything. They all come to the White House. They're all invited with their family and children. So the White House is really transformed with all the children and everything. And it's always a great pleasure to be able to give them a few cookies to share with them or something, and to take pictures with the family. So that was a great time. The time that I really love at the White House. Now, I had a thing happen to me once that I didn't really care for it, but it's somehow funny. That was the last year of the Bush, Mr. Senior, President Bush Senior, and I had done my first gingerbread. There was a gingerbread village, And then they were having dinner that night with some close friend. That was right after Christmas, because after that they were leaving at the end of January. So Mrs. Bush sent someone to get me in my room upstairs in my office, say, tell Roland to come back downstairs, because I was ready to go home. They had finished dinner, and they had two guests that night. They had Neil Diamond and Julie Andrews. And then, I came down, and Mrs. Bush said, Roland, well, why don't you take our guest and explain about the gingerbread village and everything? So I did just that. And then after that, Mrs. Barbara Bush comes and said, Roland, don't go home now. Come back over here. We're all going to get around the piano and we're going to sing. Now, unfortunately, singing for me is not my forte. That would have cleared the floor very quickly if I'd started to sing. So, but anyway, Julie Andrews and Neil went behind the piano in the grand foyer, and they started to play Christmas thing, and Neil was looking at me because he could see that I was only moving my lips, but I was not singing. And Neil just stopped. He said, Mrs. Bush, I think we should stop that because I don't have my music note, and I cannot play without my music note. I know that was bogus. He could play anything he wanted anytime, but that's how I got off the hook.
Well, thank you very much, Chef Mesnier, for joining us today to talk about holiday celebrations in the White House. We greatly appreciate your firsthand account of the behind-the-scenes magic that makes the holiday season so special and delicious. And you are a hero of mine and a hero of the association, and we're so privileged to work with you on our books and other projects, and we look forward to doing that for many years to come.
Christmas is a magical time.
And if you'd like to learn more about the White House Historical Association, White House history, or to buy Chef Mesnier's White House gingerbread book,
we're here to sign.
You can visit us at our website, whitehousehistory.org, or our shop in Washington at 1610 H Street Northwest.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You've been listening to the 1600 Sessions. This podcast is presented by the White House Historical Association and produced by Long Story Short Media. You can subscribe or download new episodes at the1600sessions.org. And you can help others find this podcast by rating and reviewing us on iTunes. Thanks again to Jennifer Pickens, Gary Walters, and Roland Mesnier. And thank you to all of our listeners who have joined us for the past year exploring White House history. Happy holidays to all, and be sure to join us in the new year as we launch Season 2 of the 1600 Sessions. And as always, thank you to the U.S. Marine Band Library, which provided the music for this podcast.